Hey guys, tonight we are slipping quietly into a world of silk cuffs, stewed lotus root, and compliments so delicately worded they could be mistaken for apologies. You're entering the swirling, quietly catastrophic world of Tang Dynasty banquets, where failure isn't loud, it's dignified and polite, and smells faintly of camphor oil and pickled plum. You step out of your lacquered sedan chair, wobbling slightly from the ride, and adjust your robe. The sun is just melting behind the mulberry trees. Golden light catches on carved stone lions at the entryway. A servant bows low too low and gestures for you to follow. The estate before you isn't the emperor's, but it belongs to someone who probably sends the emperor fruit baskets. Often. The gate smells of sandalwood and warm dust. You cross into the courtyard on mosaic tiles older than your great-uncle's scrolls. Somewhere nearby, a flute lets out a single wavering note, as if the musician is warming up or reconsidering their life choices. You've been invited to a banquet. You don't remember how exactly. Some cousin's brother-in-law pulled a string or dropped a name, possibly both. What matters is that you're here, and that you haven't yet done anything disastrously informal. The air is rich with perfume and the faint steam of early courses. Plum sauce, roasted yams, fish skin fried to translucency. You pass a courtyard garden where a crane pretends not to watch you and arrive at the outer hall where low tables gleam and guests float rather than sit. You do your best impression of a person who belongs. There are rules, of course, unspoken, but everywhere. You nod, then bow, then half, bow, then panic, and combine the two. A man beside you coughs discreetly. You hope it's not a commentary. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're ushered toward your seat, not quite the head table, but not near the door either, a respectable place. As you lower yourself, a servant glides past to refill teacups with something floral and gently suspicious. You catch a glimpse of a carved plaque in front of you. Your name, calligraphed. Your chair cushion sighs as you settle. Around you, guests murmur politely. Some recite poetry. Some just smile and dab their lips for no reason at all. The first dish arrives. It looks like a radish, but it's not. It might be duck. It might be a metaphor. No one eats yet. The host arrives. He's wearing more silk than a festival dragon and walks like he's being timed by a sundial. Everyone rises, bows, reseats in exact reverse order. A bell tinkles. The banquet has begun. Here's your first mistake. You reach for your cup with your right hand. Wrong. Always left first. Right is reserved for business, and tonight is about art, virtue, and how not to drop a dumpling in public. You try to laugh, quietly. But laughter, you realize, is also layered. There's the, I understand this reference laugh. The, what a clever use of metaphor laugh. And of course the, my fish is undercooked, but I respect your ancestors laugh. You select none of them. You smile instead, like someone who has read Confucian etiquette manuals, but only for the footnotes. The dishes arrive slowly, ceremonially. Names are announced, ingredients are described, no one eats them, not yet. Eating before your superior has lifted chopsticks is the Tang Dynasty version of sending an all-caps email to your boss. You sit, you wait, you glance at your napkin and wonder whether you're meant to fold it diagonally. Someone beside you does. You do the same. It might be a test. It might just be origami. From the courtyard, a breeze lifts the edge of your sleeve. You exhale. Only 27 more dishes to go. You're halfway through the tea, probably jasmine, possibly chrysanthemum, definitely served at a temperature known only to ghosts, and the conversation around you begins to shift. Not toward anything risky, of course. This isn't a tavern in Luoyang. This is a formal Tang banquet where even compliments wear shoes. Tonight's topic, fans. Yes, fans. To be clear, not the loud ones, not the gossipy ones, not even the ones who carve opera lyrics into peach pits. These are literal fans, paper silk, sandalwood slatted feathered if you're dramatic. Everyone has one. And as you are swiftly learning, everyone has an opinion on the correct way to hold one. The gentleman to your left lifts his fan slowly vertically like a screen. He peeks just above the rim with a serene nod as if to say, I'm observing you respectfully, but not too much. Across the table, a woman flicks hers horizontally, once sharply her gesture, dismissive, precise, and oddly mathematical. You realize you've been holding yours like a soup ladle. You attempt to reposition, rotating it with great care, but it flutters, then snaps shut with the sound of a startled duck. A few heads turn, one eyebrow lifts. You bow slightly, mutter something about humidity, and casually slide the fan under your table mat. Gone. Never existed. This would be less mortifying if fans weren't a form of communication, much like the eyebrows of British aristocrats or the subtle yawns of tired house cats. Tang Dynasty fans carried nuance. A flick toward the ceiling. This poem is long. A tap on the wrist, pass the sauce. A slow circle above the bowl. This is the wrong sauce. The host is currently holding his fan open, palm up, letting it rest on his wrist like a bracelet. Everyone glances down at their own. Adjustments are made. You mimic accordingly and end up with the fan positioned somewhere between elegant disdain and awaiting dentist. A bell chimes. Course 1 is officially underway. Slivers of lotus root arranged like spokes of a tiny wheel appear on tiny plates. The guest across from you lifts one delicately, then pauses. All eyes turn to the head of the table. The eldest guest, some sort of retired judge, you think lifts his chopsticks, and the meal finally begins. But even now, it's more theater than feast. No one chews audibly, no one empties a dish. This is not the place for appetite. It's a place for refinement. Each bite is a punctuation mark. No one wants to end the sentence too early. The servers move like well-rehearsed dancers, sliding bowls forward and drawing them away in perfect synchronicity. The man beside you nods at a passing dish and murmurs, "Ah, plum sauce with garlic blossom. Courageous." You nod. It could also be fermented goat. You're not about to challenge him. And then the wine arrives. Rice wine. Sweet. Clear. Served in tiny jewel-colored cups. The first pour is ceremonial. You raise your cup not too high, not too fast. It should be visible, but not thirsty. You take a sip. The second sip is the signal. Yes, I understand this is a banquet. The third is optional. The fourth is ambitious. The fifth is historically risky. Because here's the twist. Drinking is required but not actually encouraged. You're expected to toast, of course. Toast the host. Toast the host's ancestors. Toast the weather if needed. But one must not appear eager. Eagerness implies desperation. Or lower birth. Or a fondness for plum wine that borders on personal tragedy. You lift your cup again. A poet at the far end raises his in response. His poem apparently has just reached a metaphor involving crane's moonlight and lost vegetables. Everyone chuckles softly. The host laughs gently just enough. You mirror the tone. Your laugh exits your mouth in the form of a faint breeze. You've made it through course 1. You haven't spilled anything. Your fan faux pas is nearly forgotten. Only 12 more courses to go. And dessert might include lychee. Or not. That depends entirely on whether the lychee have been deemed poetic enough for tonight. Course 2 arrives on a tray lacquered so dark it seems to drink the candlelight. On it, 3 porcelain bowls each with a lid. The servers don't speak. They simply bow, present and vanish. The room leans forward collectively like a field of reeds catching a gust. You lift your lid with care. Steam curls upward, fragrant with ginger, and something alarmingly aquatic. A fish. Definitely a fish. Its eye stares at you from the side of the bowl like it's seen things. And now you will too. Your chopsticks hover. The table remains perfectly still. The poet across from you begins a quiet monologue about river spirits. You glance left, hoping for guidance, and see an official daintily lift a sliver of meat, dab it on a napkin, and place it on his tongue with the solemnity of a sacred oath. You do the same, almost. The fish, silvery, slippery, exquisitely tender, slides in the wrong direction. A quiet thwip. The fish skin has launched off your chopsticks and landed with a scandalous plop onto the silk robe of the gentleman to your right. Silence. Absolute echoing silence. You freeze. He blinks. Then slowly he looks down. There on his sleeve a smudge the size and texture of an awkward apology. He dabs it with a napkin. You begin forming a formal apology in your head, one that includes references to your ancestry, your respect for freshwater life, and possibly a self-imposed exile. But he just nods. A lively fish, he says calmly. They do protest. Laughter spreads low and grateful. Crisis, it seems, is past. Tang Dynasty etiquette, you're realizing, is a dance one where stepping on toes is forgivable, but only if you acknowledge it with enough poetry. In this case, the poetry came via understatement, and that man's sleeves may just be the most forgiving fabric in Chang'an. You offer him a refill of wine. He accepts, bowing slightly. Just like that, you're back in the current. Next to arrive duck slices lacquered in soy and honey. They glisten in the candlelight like small edible moons. No one rushes to eat. Instead, a young official clears his throat and recites a couplet something about autumn reeds and the melancholy of plum trees. The duck cools. That's expected. Tang cuisine isn't always about heat. It's about balance. Temperature, texture, even the direction the meat curls on the plate, it all matters. You try a bite. It's divine. But again, no gulping. Each chew must be invisible. You're beginning to master the tiny nod of appreciation, the barely there murmur of assent. And then it happens. A guest third seat from the host. Older round of face eyes, Bright lifts his wine and begins to hiccup. Not dramatically, not loudly, but it's there. A high-pitched hike just as the next toast begins. He lowers his cup. Everyone pretends nothing is happening. He hiccups again. Someone coughs politely. A musician in the corner strikes a loud note on a guzheng to cover the sound. Another hiccup. No one makes eye contact. This is it. The most polite moment of collective denial you've ever witnessed. A servant appears with a dish of pickled hawthorn, places it silently in front of the hiccuping man, and bows. The man accepts. Chews. Breathes. The hiccups vanish. Order is restored. You exhale. Historians still argue whether Tang banquets were meant to showcase status or test endurance. Some insist they were displays of opulence. Others believe they functioned more like live theater, where every action carried coded meaning. In moments like this, you lean toward the latter. You're not just eating, you're performing. A poem is recited, another toast made. The candle flames sway slightly in the open air. You fold your napkin left to right, like the official beside you, and begin preparing for whatever course comes next. But not too eagerly. That's gauche. Course 3 arrives in elegant silence, carried on a low bamboo tray by a servant whose feet make no sound. You're starting to wonder if the staff is actually floating. A bowl is set before you, wide-rimmed, delicate, filled with a pale broth so clear it reflects the oil lamp above. In the center floats one lonely dumpling. A single dumpling. You glance around. Each guest receives just one. No refills, no seconds. This isn't lunch at a monastery. It's culinary philosophy. Minimalism with a degree in literature. You examine your dumpling. Its pleats are perfect. The top is pinched like a scroll, the base golden, where it kissed the bottom of the pot. You suspect it contains crab, or maybe bean curd, or possibly regret. You'll never know unless you eat it. But should you? That's the problem. Because here's the unspoken truth: no one wants to be the first to finish. Banquets during the Tang Dynasty were not feasts of hunger. They were performances of restraint. Eating quickly implied greed. Cleaning your plate meant either you hadn't been served enough or had not yet learned subtlety. Leaving a bite behind. A quiet nod to abundance. A gesture of confidence. An edible wink. The poet across the table pokes his dumpling with the tip of his chopstick, as if to gauge its emotional stability. The scholar to your right takes a slow, deliberate bite, then sets his chopsticks down with such elegance it nearly qualifies as choreography. You follow their lead. Lift, bite, chew in absolute silence. The filling is yes, crab, a hint of ginger, possibly plum blossom. You resist the urge to sigh out loud. One more bite would end it, but the final bite is dangerous. It draws attention. It says I enjoyed this, but might also say I'm still learning, or worse, I'm hungry. So, you wait. You let the dumpling float half-eaten, a symbol of your spiritual restraint. Later, you might sneak the rest into your sleeve. Not now. Not while everyone is pretending not to watch. Next comes conversation, but not loud conversation. Banquets of this caliber demand topics that hover, like incense, ephemeral, fragrant, slightly confusing. The elder magistrate, seated 2 cushions from the host, raises a question. Is poetry still possible in an age of wax seals? No one knows what he means. Everyone nods. A younger official responds with a verse. It contains 7 animals, 4 kinds of wind, and 1 unexpected turnip. Applause, silent brief follows. You nod as well, having understood exactly none of it, but feeling spiritually enriched nonetheless. Suddenly, a servant appears with a scroll, a real one, unfurled dramatically and laid out across the center table like a runway. Upon it, a painted landscape. Mountains cranes a fisherman, whose posture suggests he's deeply considering the nature of soup. The host gestures. You lean forward. The scroll is meant to pair with the next dish. Yes, that's a thing. Tang Dynasty culinary culture sometimes blended food and art so thoroughly that the meal itself was a kind of gallery. The dish appears delicate rice balls, each dyed a different color, using flowers, osmanthus, yellow orchid, purple chrysanthemum white. They mirror the scroll's landscape, the yellow hills, the violet mist, the snow-white crane. You pick up the orchid-hued one. It's soft, fragrant, tastes like something a painter would sip while doubting his brushstrokes. You nod again. You're not full. That's intentional. Banquets here aren't linear. They're loops. You think you're progressing, but it's more like spiraling inward. Each course is smaller, stranger, more poetic. You're not eating, you're ascending. You try to sit straighter, widen your peripheral awareness. You think you see someone wipe a tear after tasting the yellow one. Maybe they just remembered a poem, or they've been chewing since last spring. It's hard to tell. Either way, you feel a sense of odd peace. The dumpling still floats in your bowl untouched since your one perfect bite. You're starting to understand. You're halfway through pretending not to stare at the dumpling in your bowl when the next dish arrives with the quiet solemnity of a sunrise fish. Again. But not just any fish. This one is whole headtail, fin's dignity, and arranged on a polished wooden tray with herbs that seem arranged more for moral instruction than flavor. The fish gleams. Its skin has been lacquered with soy, then brushed with rice wine, then probably recited poetry to. A curl of steam rises from its gills, and you, poor you, have no idea how to approach it without dishonoring someone's ancestors. Across the table, an official leans forward ever so slightly and delicately, with a single practiced flick of his chopsticks removes the cheek. Not the eye, not the spine, not even the fillet. The cheek. It's a move so specific and so fraught with meaning that several nearby guests nod in what appears to be reverent acknowledgement. This, you realize, is now a game of fish etiquette. You glance down at your own serving. The head is pointed at you. You vaguely recall that in certain circles that might mean you're the honored guest, or possibly the sacrificial one. It depends on the angle and your recent poetry output. You make your choice. You reach not for the cheek, you're not there yet, but for the fin. Humble, safe, a silent nod to humility. You remove it. Cleanly avoid eye contact and return your chopsticks to their rest with the grace of someone who is pretending to know what they're doing. It works. The conversation flows on. You relax into the rhythm again. Around you, guests share quiet commentary about the fish's symbolic role in Tang court life prosperity, grace the quiet strength of the scholar official who avoids confrontation, but never misses an opportunity to quote Confucius. And then in the lull that follows a particularly beautiful turn of phrase, it happens. A cough. Not a dry one, not a discreet one. A full-bodied, belly-tossing, sleeve-muffled, tear-producing cough. The guest 2 seats down has inhaled something, maybe a bone, maybe his pride. Either way, the table halts. No one moves. You know the rules. You do not draw attention to a guest in distress. That would be impolite. But you also cannot pretend he doesn't exist. That would be cruel, so you wait. A servant glides silently behind him and places a porcelain cup of plum vinegar by his elbow. Without looking, the man picks it up, drinks, clears his throat, and sets it back down with the practiced precision of someone who has clearly done this before. Everyone resumes eating. A nearby guest raises a toast to the fickle nature of river herbs. Everyone nods solemnly. The incident is by unspoken agreement erased from the timeline. This is the Tang Banquet's true genius catastrophe without disruption. Drama without noise. Elegance even in error. You lift your cup again, toast, no one in particular, and drink. The rice wine is starting to taste like confidence. Or maybe it's just that your hands have stopped shaking. Next to you, a man in green robes adjusts his sleeves with a sigh and begins talking about the time he once mistook a dried plum for a metaphor and offended a visiting inspector. His story is slow, rambling, gentle. You smile. Not because it's funny, although it is, but because it's safe to smile again. Historians still argue whether Tang officials were actually good at politics or just spectacularly adept at avoiding disaster during long meals. Some say the banquets functioned as performance reviews in disguise, Others believed they were simply the safest place for rival courts to circle one another like decorative koi. Either way, you're starting to see how hard it is to fail politely. It's not the fall that matters, it's the form. You glance down at your bowl, where the fish's tail has curled into a perfect spiral. One more bite, but slowly. By the time the course 5 arrives thin strips of smoked duck, nestled beside pickled lily bulb, you've learned to pretend you're not hungry. Or rather, you've learned to act as though hunger is a theoretical concept that happens to other less cultivated people. You keep your posture straight, you breathe shallowly, you nod with the tranquil boredom of someone who has recited the classic of rites more than once. It's working. Until your table mates begin a conversation about textiles. Textiles. Not how to make them. No, that would imply labor. Instead, they debate the philosophical implications of weave density. One scholar claims silk with too fine a thread is morally suspicious. It weakens the character, he says, stroking his own cuffs, which are emphatically coarse. Another guest counters, but translucency reveals the spirit. A third guest, who for the last hour has said nothing, except to quote lines from outdated almanacs, chimes in the emperor's sleeves are said to whisper when he walks. This comment causes a small silence, as if everyone is trying to imagine whispering sleeves, or trying to determine whether that's an acceptable metaphor at this altitude of etiquette. Meanwhile, your duck grows cold. You glance down. It glistens bronze skin, delicate meat, a hint of red spice you think might be Sichuan pepper. You inhale. It smells like confidence. You take a bite. It tastes like a secret. A server passes with a tray of moist cloths. You wipe your fingers delicately, always fingertips first, then palms, never the wrist. That's considered rustic. You resist the urge to wipe your forehead, which would be honest, but disastrous. Across the table, someone sighs with longing. In Chang'an, they say, one can taste the moon in a well-prepared duck. You nod mouth full and make a mental note to write that down later, possibly in a letter to yourself. Next comes a surprise poetry. Not just spoken, written. Servants bring small paper scrolls and lay them at each place. You're to compose a couplet. No pressure, nothing too lofty, just a pair of lines that summarize your feelings about this exact moment, preferably using metaphors involving clouds, insects, or filial duty. You stare at the paper. The ink brush in your hand feels like it's judging you. Around you, guests begin scribbling, soft whispers of calligraphy, the occasional, One man mutters the word elegiac, like it's a threat. You look up. You think of the duck. You think of the textiles. You write, silk sleeves shimmer like thoughts unspoken. Duck skin glows as though moon-stroked. You pause. You blink. It's not bad. You lay down the brush with exaggerated casualness and fold the scroll. A servant collects it with a bow. Somewhere down the table, someone recites a verse about plum trees in exile. It gets a quiet round of polite hums. You're feeling accomplished, possibly smug. Then the scholar next to you begins unfolding a fan. On it, your poem, already rewritten, improved. The brushwork now loops like vines. Your duck line remains, but now there's a reference to the emperor's eyebrows and a pun involving cinnamon. You nod. Acceptable plagiarism. You bow slightly in thanks. Historians still argue whether Tang banquets were a training ground for poetry or a slow-motion arms race in social subtlety. Some believe the verses were tested later by secret examiners. Others claim they were used as wrapping paper for candied walnuts. Regardless, everyone wrote, everyone read, everyone pretended not to compare. Your scroll, you suspect, will end up lining a drawer, but it will do so tastefully. Course 6 is announced with the faint clink of porcelain cloud ear fungus with winter bamboo. You're not sure what that is. You smile anyway. By now, you have learned to control your eyebrows. This is critical. Tang banquet etiquette doesn't allow for raised brows, arch sarcasm, or any expression more intense than mild curiosity beneath a thin veil of stoic gratitude. And this next course will test every muscle of your self-control. It's soup, clear shimmering, presented in a bowl so fine you can see your reflection, and your reflection looks worried. Floating in the middle is what appears to be a jellyfish, or perhaps a poetic metaphor for discomfort. The server whispers, double-steamed deer tendon with chrysanthemum. You smile, you nod, you prepare your soul. You lift a spoon, not metal, of course, but porcelain, and stir gently. The tendon jiggles like it has personal opinions. You take a small sip. It tastes like a memory someone else had filtered through herbs and hot water. Across the table, an official sighs with pleasure. Ah, the texture, he murmurs. Sublime. You glance at your bowl. Texture is one word, resistance is another. Still, you take a second sip, because leaving an untouched bowl might suggest offense. And offense is a flavor no one here is prepared to tolerate. The scholar to your right launches into a story about a previous banquet where he mistook the turtle shell for a pickled radish. The tale is long meandering and strangely comforting. Everyone chuckles softly at the end. The punchline is that he was corrected by a 6-year-old princess. You laugh politely then, more genuinely when you realize his mistake led to 3 days of royal dietary consultation. A servant arrives to remove the bowls. You bow your thanks. The tendon has been conquered barely, and you feel the quiet pride of someone who has walked through a storm with dry shoes. Next, the host signals for a musical interlude. 2 musicians appear carrying instruments with curves so elegant they might be sculpture. One begins tuning a guqian, a 7-string zither that sounds like a sigh filtered through moonlight. The other adjusts a jiao flute carved from bamboo and rumor. They begin to play. The melody floats over the table light as steam slow as ink drying on parchment. No one speaks, eyes close, breaths align. A dish arrives, pickled chrysanthemum leaves dusted with sesame, but no one touches it yet. The music is eating for you. You find yourself drifting, not asleep, but not entirely awake either. The guqin plucks a memory loose your childhood maybe. The jiao adds one, a spring morning, a broken sandal, something soft and distant and stitched to the edge of who you were before you learned to bow this much. When the song ends, no one claps. Instead, there is a shared exhale, then silence, then soup spoons lifted with reverence for both broth and memory. Historians still argue whether the musical interludes at Tang banquets were planned or improvised. Some say they were chosen to reflect the season, the guest list, even the seating chart. Others believe the performers simply played what the host last heard in a dream. Either way, they mattered. The pickled greens, when you do eat them, are sour and cool, a perfect palate cleanser for the soup that tried to dissolve your sense of self. A servant slips a note onto your table. It reads compliments on your posture from the host. You sit straighter. You do not smile, but you glow inside like a lantern. This is how you win a banquet. It's nearing the midpoint of the evening, though no clock marks it, and time here seems measured more by spoonfuls than sunrises. You've survived tendon textiles and tone poetry. And now, course 8 arrives, sweet and sour carp, coiled like a dragon in a shallow dish, its mouth frozen mid-yawn, as if startled by its own presentation. A tiny lacquered sign beside the plate bears the name of the dish, calligraphed with such flourish it resembles tangled grass. You squint. One character might mean auspicious. Another might be slightly alarming, best not to ask. You pick at a scale. It yields like a good confession. The taste surprises you. It's sharp citrusy with a honeyed undertone that speaks of weeks fermenting in a jar watched by 3 generations of careful cooks. You glance around. Others nod in appreciation, but no one says anything aloud. Compliments, after all, must be saved for later, or wrapped in metaphor. The conversation shifts. The man beside you, whose robe is embroidered with clouds that appear to shift depending on the light, begins discussing inkstones. Not ink, not brushes, not calligraphy. Inkstones. He launches into an ode about the superiority of Huizhou slate versus Duanxi quarry yields. You nod as if you too are haunted by the memory of subpar ink-grinding texture. In truth, you once tried to write a love letter on mulberry paper and spilled the ink before finishing your opening metaphor. You try to recall that metaphor now, something about peaches and destiny, or maybe rain and socks. Across the table, another official quietly produces his own inkstone. Yes, he brought it to dinner. He places it on the tablecloth like a challenge. The others pretend not to notice then, one by one, begin offering subtle commentary. That's unexpectedly rustic. Bold slope angle, very northern. Does it sing in rainlight? You don't know what that last one means. You suspect no one does. It's not the meaning, it's the delivery. A servant brings fresh water in a blue-glazed pot, not for drinking, for admiring. The glaze was fired using plum ash, or so it said. You lean in, politely nod, and agree that it evokes solitude. Now someone tells a story. It begins with a bowl of walnuts and ends with a promotion. Somewhere in between is a fox, an eclipse, and an unexpected bath. You follow about 70% of it, but it doesn't matter. The point is that the walnuts were shared, generously, with restraint. And that kindness echoes across dynasties. Historians still argue whether Tang storytelling etiquette was formalized or free-form. Some believe tales followed coded arcs with moral checkpoints and expected symbolism. Others say stories were a test of one's ability to entertain, without offending humor, without brashness, pathos without tears. Tonight's storyteller is clearly a master. His voice never rises, never strains. Just a gentle rhythm that loops like river current carrying you with it. Your fish cools. You finish it in 2 bites, eyes still on the storyteller. Someone offers him a toasted lotus seed, a reward, a nod. The ultimate Tang compliment, snack-based. You tuck that away. Should you survive this evening, you might write a poem about lotus seeds, or inkstones, or carp with unexpected citrus. The moment pauses. The host lifts his cup. Everyone rises slightly. Another toast. To quiet resilience, he says softly, and fish that do not flinch. You drink, and this time, you don't pretend not to smile. Somewhere between the toast and the 9th course, your legs begin to ache. Not because you're sitting improperly, heavens. No, your posture is immaculate. But because you're sitting perfectly on a cushion so flat, it might be a philosophical test. Tang banquet seating you now, understand, is less about comfort and more about controlled endurance. Fortunately, you're distracted by the arrival of your next dish. Bean curd. Not the kind you might expect. This isn't tofu swimming in broth or fried and crisped. No, this is a chilled cube pale as moonlight topped with slivered almond and a single goji berry. It wobbles slightly when placed as if considering its purpose. You look around. Every guest has received the same modest white cube. The man to your left, who earlier recited 3 lines about clouds and anise, picks up a tiny silver spoon and breaks the bean curd surface with the delicacy of a bird landing on water. You do the same. The texture is extraordinary silk turning into mist. The flavor, barely there. A whisper of sweetness, a hint of mountain water, the echo of a memory from a time when sugar was still a luxury. This is a palate cleanser, but more than that, it's a moment of silence in the middle of a conversation. A full-body exhale. Around you, guests seem less tense. One lady removes a single hairpin. A gentleman stretches his fingers under the table. The poet has taken off one of his shoes. This is the banquet's secret rest stop, quiet cooling necessary. It's also the perfect moment for whispered gossip. You lean slightly toward the young scribe across from you. He raises an eyebrow, permission granted. You murmur, "Did you hear about the scroll mix-up at the Chrysanthemum Festival?" He grins. She accidentally read a recipe instead of a eulogy. You nearly choke on your bean curd. Apparently, the Empress Dowager did not notice, or chose not to. Instead of a lament for her late cousin, she heard the preparation steps for plum syrup dumplings. The final line, simmer until translucent. Serve warm. Historians still argue whether this was a mistake or a very subtle protest. Either way, no one was punished. The reader was quietly reassigned to the Bureau of Culinary Rights, which may or may not be real. The bean curd now gone, the mood is lighter. One man yawns behind his fan. The music resumes strings and wind soft as breath stitched with silence. The next plate arrives bamboo shoots with pine nuts and a drizzle of fermented chrysanthemum vinegar. It smells like winter somehow. Like frost and dried leaves and the memory of a pine forest you've never visited but definitely dream about. You eat, slowly. You are now someone who eats thoughtfully. The table talks turn toward weather again, not in the mundane sense. Weather is metaphor. Rain means sorrow. Wind means change. Fog means poetry. Thunder. A conversation topic too dramatic for tonight. You mention cautiously that last week's mist over the West Lake resembled silk smoke. A few heads nod. One man writes that down. You feel a glow of success. Then of course someone has to, quote, do foo, a line about autumn cold. Everyone murmurs in agreement. You've heard it before, possibly last week, possibly 3 times tonight. It's like a banquet hymn standard, uncontroversial, elegant. You nod along. You do not mention that your favorite poet is still anonymous and mostly wrote about goats. That stays in your heart. A bell chimes. A signal. The 10th course approaches. A finger's worth of tea is poured into fresh cups. The scent of osmanthus wafts up. You sip. It tastes like restraint. Course 10 arrives with no fanfare, just the quiet rustle of silk as a servant kneels beside your cushion and sets down a bowl carved from lacquered wood. Inside, black mushrooms, sliced fine, nestled against tiny golden chestnuts and translucent slivers of ginger root. The aroma is subtle but deep, earthy, rooted, like someone has taken a forest and turned it into a lullaby. You take a bite. It tastes like damp leaves and memory. The mushrooms are tender, the chestnuts slightly sweet, the ginger sharp enough to wake you just a little, just enough to keep your posture upright, just enough to prevent you from accidentally drooling onto your sleeve. It's a thoughtful course. Not flashy, not difficult, just mindful. Like a friend checking in on you mid-conversation. Still here, it asks, still listening. You are, because something has changed. Around the table, the conversation is slower. Not because the guests are tired, though some undoubtedly are, but because the performance has softened. The opening acts are behind you. The big metaphors have been said. Now comes the part of the banquet that feels personal. The man with the scroll inkstone has taken off his outer robe. The poet has finally eaten his dumpling. The storyteller from earlier now rests his chin on his fist, listening instead of talking. And you're no longer pretending. You're participating. You pass the wine pitcher. You refill someone's cup without being asked. You place your chopsticks down in rhythm with everyone else. You no longer count courses or bites or jokes. You're simply there. And then a question is asked. It comes from the host softly, gently, as he toys with a pine nut. What is the one flavor you would carry to the next life? The table stills. A woman in a robe embroidered with cranes says, "Scallion oil on rice." The calligrapher beside her answers, "My grandmother's winter melon broth." A court historian, surprisingly young, murmurs, "Plum wine from the year my father died." No one laughs, no one scoffs. You think about it. You want to say something clever, but instead you whisper osmanthus jelly, the kind you eat in silence. The host nods. This you're learning is what Tang banquets do. They lull you into ceremony, drown you in etiquette. Then when your guard is down, ask you something simple and enormous. The tea is refilled. The air is warmer now. A breeze from the courtyard lifts one of the hanging tassels and sets it swaying like a pendulum. A servant appears with a fan, not the kind you hold, but the kind used to gently stir the air between courses. She waves it slowly, steadily sending ripples across the oil lamps. The shadows on the walls dance like brush strokes. Historians still argue whether these intermissions were logistical or symbolic. Some claim they allowed for digestion. Others insist they marked philosophical pauses, moments to check in with your thoughts, the way you check the wind before writing a haiku. You let yourself relax against the cushion. Your spine stays straight, but your shoulders finally let go. Someone to your right begins humming a melody you've heard before, though you can't place it. It sounds like riverboats and apricot blossoms and a farewell that didn't need words. You hum back softly. It's not a duet, it's an echo. And for the first time tonight, you feel not like a guest, but like someone who belongs. Course 11 arrives not on a tray, but in a folded lotus leaf, its pale green veined with steam. It's handed to you with both hands, an offering, not a delivery. You accept it with a bow, even as your fingers tremble slightly from the weight of accumulated etiquette. You open the leaf gently. Inside glutinous rice gently pressed around a core of chestnut paste lotus seed, and judging by the smell, just a hint of sweet bean. It's warm, it's fragrant, it's soft. You exhale. Somehow this feels like the safest dish of the evening, comfort disguised as formality. You take a bite. The rice yields sticky and dense. The filling is delicate. You close your eyes just for a second. Across the table, others are eating more freely now. The air has shifted. There's less tension, more quiet joy. You catch someone smiling mid-chew. A robe sleeve flutters lazily. The scroll inkstone has been returned to its pouch. You think back to earlier in the night, to the awkward fan moment, to the jellyfish soup, to the floating dumpling of destiny. How far you've come, how far you've chewed. The man beside you leans in. This, he says, tapping his lotus leaf, is the course that separates scholars from dilettantes. You nod, unsure whether to feel complimented or alarmed. He continues too fast, and you miss the texture. Too slow, and the leaf cools. The leaf is the teacher. You chew slowly, you learn. A server approaches with a ceramic box, square and lidded. Inside, tiny slivers of dried tangerine, peel soaked in rice wine. They're served on toothpicks carved from sandalwood. You're told they aid digestion. You're also told they are emotionally clarifying. You try one. It tastes like patience. Conversation resumes. Someone recounts a recent poetry contest, 10 verses in 10 minutes, each inspired by the scent of an incense blend. The winner composed a line about sandalwood, rising like a nobleman's regrets. Applause had followed. So had a marriage proposal. You try to connect those dots, fail, and nod anyway. Your host offers a riddle. This is common at this stage in the banquet. Minds are softened, tongues loosened. Everyone is full enough to think, but not yet too sleepy to reason. He says, "What is the only thing that grows smaller, the more you share it, but makes rooms larger?" A pause. A few guesses. One man says tea. Another says breath. A third quite seriously offers humility. The answer the host reveals with a smile is silence. Everyone laughs softly. Of course it is. In this hall where every word lands like silk, silence is sacred. Silence is flavor. Silence is status. You remember how many silences you've survived tonight. A child no older than 10 stands to recite a poem. Everyone stills. Her voice is clear, careful, high as a bird, but firm. Her poem is about her grandmother's cooking. The final line. "The plum she pickled still lives in my mouth." Your eyes sting. You drink your tea. It's cooler now, but still sweet. You bow to the girl. She bows back. A future poet, no doubt. Or a future host. Or both. Historians still argue whether Tang banquets were truly democratic in their appreciation of artistry, or if these child performances were simply charming spectacle. Either way, you believe she meant every syllable. The lotus leaf is empty now. The rice is gone. Your hands smell faintly of citrus. Your tongue tingles with tangerine. You shift your legs to one side carefully so as not to disrupt the stillness and prepare for whatever comes next. But not too eagerly. There's still poetry in waiting. Course 12 is whispered in, as if any more noise might break the spell now, hovering over the banquet. A round, flat dish is placed before you, porcelain the color of bone, delicately rimmed in gold leaf. At its center, a single mooncake sliced precisely into 4 quarters, each wedge facing outward like petals. The filling is salted egg yolk and lotus seed, rich, dense, an edible proverb. You've had mooncakes before, of course. Who hasn't? But this one feels ceremonial. Its crust is stamped with a character you don't recognize, likely invented for this event. Or perhaps ancient and lost, revived only for tonight. Tang chefs were known to create entire calligraphic systems for food. One scroll records a dumpling that bore the character for regret, which no one dared eat. You take a bite. It's sweet but not sugary. The salt of the yolk presses against the tongue like punctuation. Around you, guests nod as they chew. This is the turning point. The banquet is no longer ascending. It is beginning its descent. But even descents can be elegant. A servant brings a bronze censer and places it in the center of the room. Smoke curls upward, sandalwood again, but this time mixed with orange blossom. The air thickens. Time slows. Someone mentions the Empress's famous midsummer banquet, when guests were instructed to write poetry not on scrolls, but on floating lanterns which were then sent down the river. The winning verse glowed all the way to the palace wall before sinking. No one remembers the poem. Everyone remembers the lantern. A bird cries in the courtyard, possibly a night heron, possibly metaphor. A small dish is passed candied olives. You hesitate. Olives are a challenge even in less poetic contexts. But you try one. It's bitter, then sweet, then bitter again. It tastes like political survival. The official beside you raises a toast to resilient palates. You clink cups. Next, a woman 2 cushions down produces a fan and begins to paint. Yes, paint. She balances ink and brush. In one hand unfolds the fan with the other, and strokes a mountain range into existence between sips of tea. She's not showing off. This is simply what happens now. You watch in fascination as bamboo forests bloom across the folds. Someone hums an accompaniment. Someone else begins drafting a couplet inspired by her brushwork. This is collaborative art. Improvised grace. Dinner theater without the dinner part. Historians still argue whether these painted fans were meant to be gifted or merely admired in the moment. Some were burned after banquets, others sealed in lacquer boxes. A few survived their poems smudged by time and tea. The artist offers the fan to the host. He accepts with a bow so deep it creaks his knees. You finish your mooncake. The server refills your tea. This time it's pale green and nearly flavorless. A cleanser, a comma, a pause. You use it to wet your lips and remind yourself, stay awake, just a bit longer. The final courses always hold surprises. The music has changed too. The guqin has gone silent, replaced by a soft clack of wooden clappers and the distant shimmer of chimes. It sounds like someone preparing to tell a secret, and you are exactly in the right place to hear it. The secret turns out to be tofu. Yes, again. But this time, not chilled or quivering. This time it's warm, fried crisp on the outside, soft inside, nestled in a shallow pool of star anise soy, and scattered with minced scallion. It arrives on a clay dish with a chipped edge intentionally rustic, like a nod to the idea that even elegance can benefit from contrast. You take a bite. The tofu crackles slightly, then melts. The sauce lingers salty, floral, comforting. You chew slowly. This is food that encourages reflection. Food that asks how your childhood was. Food that might forgive you for something, even if you don't know what. Around the table, the mood is softer still. The scholar who's remained silent since the fish course clears his throat. He has a story. You can tell because two nearby guests straighten slightly like tuning forks. He begins voice low steady. When I was posted in the north, we had no oil. We fried tofu on hot stones. If you listened closely, it would hum before it browned. He pauses. A humming stone, he continues, teaches patience. But it won't wait for you. There's a silence so respectful it almost hums itself. No one claps. One man bows. Another repeats the phrase "a." Humming stone teaches patience under his breath, as if testing how it tastes. A servant offers a tray of melon. Thin slices fanned like pages of a book. Sweetness follows salt as always. You let a piece melt in your mouth. It tastes like clean endings. The beginning of dessert, the start of goodbye. Someone down the table mentions the emperor's favorite tofu vendor, how she was said to shape each block by hand, singing the names of mountains. No one knows what happened to her. Some say she was invited to court, others say she refused. Either way, her recipe was lost. You wonder how many flavors are lost every year, every generation, every empire. Your host raises his hand not for attention, but to summon a scroll. Yes, another scroll. This one's shorter, narrower. The kind used not for announcements or menus, but for philosophical fragments. He unrolls it and reads softly. Joy comes in rice, wisdom in tea, but tofu is truth. You're not sure whether he's quoting someone or inventing as he goes. It doesn't matter. You bow your head slightly. You are now in that particular Tang headspace, full, poetic, slightly absurd, and completely at peace with it. Historians still argue whether these later courses were meant to nourish or narrate. Some believe the food itself became metaphor, a stand-in for fate, politics, emotion. Others think Tang diners just really like tofu. Either way, this course lingers. The music is almost gone now, just the occasional thrum of a zither string plucked at random like memory, the scent of tea leaves drying near the fire, a whiff of jasmine. The official to your left leans in and murmurs, "I once wept into my tofu." You respond without hesitation, then it was seasoned well. He laughs, it's quiet but real. And that's what this banquet is now: shared softness. The velvet edge of a silk robe, the warmth of clay in your hand, the luxury of being known, if only briefly, by people who will never ask for your title, only your verse. You are exactly full, but you're still here for the next course. You think the banquet is winding down. You're wrong. Course 14 floats in, like a late plot, twist a dish so gently unexpected that several guests actually straighten. It's soup again. But unlike the tendon saga of earlier, this one is soft, translucent, nearly clear. Bird's nest. It's barely more than a shimmer in broth, a wisp of protein suspended in gold. The nest crafted by cave-dwelling swifts, collected with great risk, cleaned until nearly luminous, has been dissolved into a texture that defies description. You lift your spoon, it glides through the soup like a brushstroke on rice paper. You take a sip. It tastes like temperature, like warm breath on a cold morning, like a promise someone actually kept. Bird's nest, you're reminded, is prized not for flavor, but for virtue. It's supposed to nourish skin, calm the nerves, inspire longevity. It is both food and wish. Someone across the table murmurs, "The Empress's mother ate this every morning, lived to 94, a pause, though she also banished 3 of her children." So, balance. The host chuckles. Health without boundaries is simply indulgence. The table laughs lightly, but carefully. Everyone has relatives. A dish of salted plum arrives next one, per guest, set on a black ceramic spoon. The color is deep red, nearly brown, the skin wrinkled with time. You bite into it, and your whole mouth puckers. Sweet, then painfully sour, then sweet again. Someone sighs and whispers, "That's my entire adolescence." You nod. Accurate. The conversation turns to memory foods, the flavors that live in your bones. One guest speaks of a winter rice gruel served during exam week. Another recalls fish skin soup before her wedding. The poet confesses he cannot taste ginger without feeling both hungry and ashamed. You sip more soup. It soothes. The host's daughter, perhaps 14, perhaps 40. It's hard to tell, and the candlelight suddenly begins to sing. No warning, no accompaniment. A lullaby, maybe, or a poem disguised as melody. Her voice is high, fragile, the sound of silk being torn and mended in the same breath. She doesn't perform so much as exhale music. Everyone stops. The final note floats over your dish like incense. And then applause, polite light restrained, but real. Someone whispers, "Her mother was a dancer." Someone else whispers, "Her father wrote odes to bridges." You're not sure if either is true, but the song is still echoing in your chest. Historians still argue whether music at Tang banquets was meant to provoke emotion or simply regulate digestion. Some suggest it served as a mnemonic device, each course associated with a tone or tune. Others believe it was purely ornamental. The scholars never agree. But tonight, in this moment, with your spoon resting lightly in your hand and the salt of plums still dancing on your tongue, the purpose of the music is simple. It gives shape to silence, and you realize that's what the whole evening has done. Each dish, each poem, each gesture, the way your sleeve folds, when you bow the direction your chopsticks rest, the brushstroke on a borrowed fan. All of it shapes the silence between you, and here in this moment, you feel entirely content to exist inside that shape. Course 15 is coming, but for now you just sit and breathe. The 15th course arrives as a trio of tiny porcelain cups, each nested in a lacquered tray shaped like a plum blossom. They are placed before you with the same reverence one might give to a relic or a sleeping kitten. Inside, the first fermented peach wine, the color of late afternoon. The second, a chilled custard made with pine pollen and almond milk. The third, a tiny sphere of candied ginger, glistening like a philosopher's marble. You blink. You were not prepared for dessert to arrive as a riddle. The host gently clears his throat and says, "A progression fruit, dream fire." Ah, of course. The kind of explanation that explains everything and nothing. You nod wisely. You begin with the peach wine. It's almost syrupy. The taste lands like memory too sweet, faintly fermented and oddly familiar. You once drank something like this under a tree, or maybe in a poem, or maybe in a dream you forgot to wake from. Then the custard, cold, smooth, barely sweet. The pine pollen leaves a faint trace of forest. It tastes like restraint, like someone apologized while handing it to you. You savor it slowly. Finally, the candied ginger. It burns, just a little, a warmth that moves from your tongue to your ears to your spine. The sensation is startling, but not unwelcome, like truth or a sneeze or romantic poetry from someone you didn't know could write. You glance around. Others are finishing their ginger with varying degrees of grace. One official coughs politely into a napkin. Another exhales sharply, then murmurs, "It has awakened my ancestors." Everyone nods. This is accepted as a valid tasting note. From the far end of the hall, a servant enters holding what appears to be a single lychee, carved into the shape of a peony. It's placed at the center of the table. A gesture, not a dish. It's a metaphor, obviously. No one explains what it means. No one dares eat it. Instead, the table enters that rare banquet phase group contemplation. Someone asks what it means to finish a meal you never wanted to end. Someone else quotes a monk who once wrote, "Emptiness is not the absence of taste, but the presence of room." That gets a few approving sighs. The poet raises his cup, now filled with hot rice tea, and toasts to the silence after sweetness. You drink. The tea is plain, almost rude after the symphonic custard. But you understand its place, like the last period in a very long sentence. Historians still argue whether Tang desserts were symbolic or indulgent. Some claim they were alchemical, carefully timed to balance the humors and spiritual temperature of the guests. Others say nobles just liked fancy fruit. The candlelight dims slightly. Not intentionally, just the natural rhythm of burning wax. The host gently claps his hands. Two musicians return, not with instruments, but scrolls. They begin to read alternating lines from a Tang Dynasty love letter. The room hushes. It's not a performance, it's a reading. A remembered ache passed around like tea. Lines drift over you. Your shadow falls across my pillow. The scent of your ink still clings to the margins. I touch the brush after you. It remembered your weight. No one speaks. Some guests close their eyes. Others bow their heads. One lady wipes her cheek, pretending it's dust. You don't understand every word, but you feel every silence. The ginger still burns faintly behind your teeth. The custard has settled into your chest like an old story, and the peach wine has left your lips tasting of questions. You are not full, but you are complete. Course 16 isn't edible. It's embroidered. A procession of attendants enters, each carrying folded cloths on trays lacquered in red and gold. At first you assume it's a mistake. Then you realize these are pallet garments, small linen squares, one per guest, each infused with a different scent. Yours is pale teal, embroidered with a wave motif and tied with silk thread. You lift it, unfold it, and press it gently to your face. It smells faintly of jasmine rice paper and something mineral, perhaps the ghost of river mist. This apparently is the interlude of aroma. The host explains, to taste with the breath is to remember with the skin. You don't argue. Around the room others inhale. A few close their eyes. One guest smiles with genuine surprise and mutters ginger and plum blossom, like my tutor's sleeve. The cloth is meant to reset the senses, like a button you press for clarity, or a sigh after an argument. You press it again, slower this time. The scent lifts something inside you. You don't know what, but you feel slightly realigned. The host's daughter, she of the ghost voice lullaby, rises again. This time, she doesn't sing. She dances. A slow, fluid sequence of gestures, arms curving like calligraphy fingers, unfurling like ink. No music accompanies her, just the hush of breath and cloth and history. Her sleeves whisper across the polished floor. Her feet barely exist. This is not entertainment. It's something older, a prayer perhaps, or a thank you from the body to the body. Historians still argue whether Tang banquet dances were secular or sacred. Some describe them as seasonal invocations, movements meant to ensure good weather, stable harvests, fewer imperial scandals. Others think they were just really graceful ways to say, we're digesting now. You're not sure where this one lands, but it does something to the room. When she finishes, no one claps. A few simply bow. And then soup, yes again, but different. This one is rice-thin, nearly congee flavored with slivers of preserved vegetable and a single curl of seaweed. It's barely salted. It tastes like dawn. The server whispers, this is to remember hunger. You blink. You take a sip. It's gentle, almost nothing, a ghost of a dish, a reminder that this meal, for all its grandeur, is not guaranteed, that to have tasted 15 courses before, this is a miracle, not a rite. The poet beside you mutters, this makes the ginger sweeter. Someone else answers, this makes the silence louder. The host nods to both. You look around the room. Half the guests are eating. The other half are staring into their bowls, perhaps thinking of famine, or childhood, or what they'll write tomorrow. You finish your congee. A servant offers to take your cloth napkin. You fold it instead, place it back on its tray, and bow. The scent still lingers on your fingertips, like ink you haven't washed off, like memory pretending to be air. You are no longer counting dishes, or hours. You are simply here. You're beginning to think this banquet exists outside of time. Somewhere beyond the lacquered screens and gauze curtain lanterns, the world continues. Drums beat at city gates. Letters arrive by horse. Someone is definitely late to a wedding. But here, time is a warm towel placed gently in your hands between dreams. The 17th course is a return to sweetness, but restrained, matured like laughter after grief. A dish of boiled pears soaked in chrysanthemum syrup, garnished with candied ginkgo nuts. The pears have been peeled so precisely they shimmer like polished ivory. You slice into one with a single motion of your chopsticks, and it yields like it's grateful. It tastes like old poems, faintly floral, melting. A sweetness that arrives slowly like moonlight through rice paper. The conversation has shifted again. Now the topic is failure. Yes, failure. Tang officials are, it turns out, deeply fascinated with how to talk about their worst moments as if they were fables. The scholar who once fell asleep during an imperial recital tells of dreaming that the emperor's voice was a flute. The calligrapher who misspelled virtue on a temple plaque recounts how he added a flourish and claimed it was artistic license. You are invited gently to contribute. You consider your answer carefully. Then you say, I once served a dish upside down and called it reflection cuisine. Laughter follows, not loud but warm. The host smiles and lifts his cup, to reflection however accidental. More tea is poured. This time it's chrysanthemum of coarse, light pale, almost bitter. It cuts through the pear's syrup like philosophy, through storytelling. A breeze slips through the open lattice of the banquet hall, and the candle flames flicker like nervous thoughts. Someone pulls their sleeves closer. A guest recites a line, even sweet fruit fears the frost. The poet nods, but frost preserves. The pear dish is cleared, and then quietly, almost stealthily, comes a gift. A servant places a scroll beside your plate, rolled tight, tied in indigo thread. You glance around. Each guest receives one. The host speaks, "You've all been generous with your silence tonight. Take this fragment home." You unroll yours carefully. The ink is still slightly damp. Inside a single verse. The moon sits in broth. Even clouds wait their turn. Flavor is patience. You are not sure who wrote it. It could be the host, or the poet, or the girl with the peony fan, or someone long dead who wrote it on a napkin and forgot. Either way, it's yours now. Historians still argue whether such banquet scrolls were meant to be kept burned or buried with the guest for luck in the next life. A few have survived tucked into fan cases, found folded inside sandals, hidden in the spines of recipe books. You fold yours carefully, slip it into your sleeve. You will read it again when the world is less quiet. Someone across the room begins to hum. Not a tune, just a vibration barely there. You hum back softly. Two voices join, not in music, but in digestion. And still the banquet continues. The 18th course arrives with the calm of a whispered promise. A server sets a shallow bowl before you, a simple ceramic dish, glazed in milky jade, its contents still steaming slightly. Inside, silk tofu, delicately cradling a single quail egg yolk, floating in a broth tinted gold, with ginger and rice wine. The dish looks like a sunrise holding its breath. No garnish, no flourish, just quiet richness nested in simplicity. You take a sip. The broth is warm, gently spiced. The tofu dissolves without resistance. The yolk bursts like a secret adding depth, a soft heaviness. You eat slowly, reverently, like the bowl is telling you its last story. Across the table, others do the same. This course, you realize, is not about taste. It's about grace. No one speaks. There is no commentary, no banter, no philosophical riddles. Just the sound of porcelain against lips and the soft exhale of appreciation. A breeze lifts a paper lantern near the far wall. Its tassels sway like the tail of a sleeping cat. The light shivers. You feel the shift on your face. Then, as if prompted by nothing and everything, the poet stands and begins to recite. Tofu is the soul of soup, soft, silent, holding more than it reveals. The yolk a sun trapped in cloud, a question asked only once. The guests nod. The host claps just once, and that is enough. Historians still argue whether Tang banquets were theater or ritual, whether the food was meant to sustain, entertain, or simply buy time for the poetry to ferment. This dish answers quietly all of the above. A child slips into the room with a tray of sweets, not for eating yet, but for choosing. Each guest is offered a pick, a candied lotus seed, a strip of sugared winter melon, or a sliver of amber-like hawthorn jelly. You choose the jelly. It shines like a stained glass window. You place it on your dish and wait. No one eats theirs. Not yet. This is a pause, a preview, a soft promise of closing sweetness. The host rises again. He shares a final anecdote, not historical, but personal, about a banquet where he laughed so hard at a lychee joke that he inhaled an entire anise seed and saw stars. It felt, he says, like being reborn, through the nose. Laughter ripples across the table. One guest snorts into her tea. You laugh too hard and briefly forget what century it is. The jelly sits on your dish glistening. You eat it. The taste is tart, vivid, oddly clean. It cuts through the broth, the tofu, the quiet. It announces we are almost done. You place your chopsticks down. A servant brings a basin of warm water, scented with lemongrass. You rinse your fingertips. You feel like you've just emerged from a dream of rivers and porcelain and unread letters. The poet sighs. We've begun the descent. The host replies, "Then let us descend like silk." Descent, it turns out, comes on a platter of noodles. Not flashy, not ornate. Just a modest tangle of hand-pulled wheat strands dressed in sesame oil, vinegar, and scallion. There's a slice of braised tofu off to one side, and a few crisp leeks scattered like punctuation. The bowl is warm, humble, honest, and somehow it is the most intimate dish of the night. You lift your chopsticks and twirl. The noodles are springy. They carry the sauce like memory, just enough, never too much. You chew slowly, and it tastes like every conversation you've ever wanted to restart but didn't know how. The host clears his throat gently not to speak, but to signal this course is story time. Guests lean forward. A woman in a robe the color of river clay begins. When I was 12, I stole noodles from my tutor's lunchbox. I replaced them with strips of my own calligraphy. He never said anything, but the next day he brought extra. The table murmurs. Another guest, a military official with fingers ink-stained from an earlier scroll, adds, "In my province, we give noodles to widows. It's supposed to tie them to the earth again." Someone whispers, "And to the living." You nod. This dish carries more than calories. You finish your bowl and find yourself almost sighing. There's something healing about starch and memory, about eating something unambitious and true after 17 courses of philosophical pageantry. Historians still argue whether noodles were considered refined enough for banquet tables in the Tang Dynasty. Some say they were too rustic. Others believe they were precisely the right metaphor, entangled, nourishing, quietly infinite. You sip the broth at the bottom of your bowl. It tastes like forgiveness. The musician, silent until now, picks up his guqin again and strums a short phrase. Not a song, more like a period or a breath. You look around. Guests are leaning back, shoulders relaxed, eyes softened. One guest has undone the top clasp of his robe, not out of laziness, but honesty. There's less posture now, less performance. You're no longer trying to impress the room. You're just part of it. The host lifts his teacup, not for a toast, but for comfort. Let the final flavors arrive without expectation, he says. The tongue is full. Let the heart taste what remains. Candles are trimmed, plates are cleared, napkins are folded into soft pyramids and placed gently at each setting, like miniature altars to satiation. Someone says, "This is the first time I've felt truly hungry," after eating. You nod. The noodles have done something, loosened something. You didn't come here to confess. But somehow this food has asked you to remember. And remembering is its own kind of fullness. The 20th course is silence. Not metaphorical silence, actual deliberate host-instructed silence. No dishes served. Instead, attendants quietly circulate with ceramic bowls filled with hot water, infused with dried tangerine peel and a single clove. They do not pour it. They simply let it steam in the center of the table. You are invited to inhale, nothing more. You lean in. The scent is soft and dry and slightly nostalgic. The tangerine rises first, bright sharp sun preserved, and then the clove anchors it with something woody shadowy. It smells like a memory you didn't know you had. Maybe a winter morning. Maybe someone else's kitchen. Around you no one speaks. You can hear robes shifting. Tea being poured somewhere in the distance. The soft creak of the lacquered table as someone adjusts their weight. But not a single voice. The host closes his eyes. You do the same. This is not an intermission, this is the course. A moment for digestion, for ghosts, for everything that didn't fit on a plate. You think of your favorite course so far. You think of the tofu, the ginger, the poet's absurd regret dumpling, the girl's peony song. You think of how little you've spoken tonight and how much has been said anyway. Eventually a bell rings. Not loudly, just once. A porcelain note bright and clear. The silence ends gently, and with it comes fruit. No tray, no pattern, just a selection of whatever was ripe this week, served in mismatched bowls, sliced jujubes, peeled loquats, a few persimmons sugared at the edges. There are exactly as many pieces of fruit as guests, one per person, the final act of precision. You select a loquat. Its skin is already split slightly. It's sweet, sharp, slippery. You eat it in one bite and feel somehow like something has closed inside you, in a good way. The host smiles and says, fruit is not dessert. It is a reminder of what he does not say. But someone beside you whispers that sweetness is seasonal and seasons end. You feel that. A scroll is passed around not to read, but to sign. Not with names, but with impressions. Guests are invited to dip their fingers into a shallow dish of ink and press one fingerprint each onto the scroll's edge. You watch as pinky's thumbs, index fingers leave their prints in a line, no names, no titles. Just presence, just proof. You add yours without hesitation. Historians still argue whether this custom existed or was invented by a particularly poetic Tang hostess who once ran out of paper fans. But the scroll survives, they say, inked with echoes preserved in cedar boxes alongside poems and menu fragments. The scroll is rolled away. The table is nearly bare now. A single attendant lights a fresh stick of incense and places it at the center of the room. The scent is different now, more grounding, less floral. You don't know what it is. You don't need to. The host lifts his empty teacup and says, "That was course 20. 10 flavors remain. None of them will be edible." And no one minds. You expect course 21 to be poetry. It is not. It is calligraphy. A long, narrow sheet of rice paper is placed before each guest, weighted gently at the corners with polished river stones. A pot of ink, a delicate brush, and a shallow water dish follow. You are not asked to write a poem. You are asked to copy a single character. The character varies from guest to guest. Yours is Jing Quiet. You hold the brush as instructed, lightly upright, as if holding a sleeping moth. You dip it into the ink and draw the first stroke slow, uneven, a little too thick. The next is better. By the fourth, you've found your breath. By the seventh, your hand knows more than your eyes. You write quiet 12 times. It begins to mean something. Or maybe it just begins to stop needing to. Across the table, others are doing the same. One man pauses to blow lightly on his paper. A woman adds an accidental flourish and smiles like she meant it. Someone blots a mistake and murmurs, a wrinkle in stillness. The host walks slowly between you, hands clasped. He says nothing, only stops to admire a brushstroke here, a blotch there, nodding like a gardener inspecting spring's first weeds. No judgment, just presence. When everyone finishes, the pages are lifted and set to dry. The next course is words, not served spoken. A guest stands, unscrolls a small parchment, and recites a letter written to his mother 20 years ago. It's short, a single paragraph, full of mundane things, the weight of winter blankets, the shape of pears that year, how he missed her stewed eggplant. No one moves, no one coughs. You feel the back of your throat tighten. When he finishes, no one claps. The host simply says, "The best letters require no reply." Another guest shares a note found folded into a book at a tea house, an apology signed with a red thumbprint. The ink had faded. The sentiment had not. You look down at your fingers, still faintly stained from the character Quiet. You begin to understand. Historians still argue whether calligraphy at Banquets was artistic spiritual, or just an excuse to make scholars feel useful between dumplings. Some say it turned the meal into a meditation. Others believe it was a form of social proof, demonstrating that one could balance elegance with literacy. You sip tea that has somehow reappeared in your cup. The ink on your paper has dried. A server gently lifts it away. You bow your head as they pass. It feels like surrender, in the softest sense of the word. A breeze brushes the edge of the screen. The incense curls like an eyebrow raised in amusement. The poet seated near the window murmurs, "Food fills the belly. Ink fills the air." And indeed it does. The 22nd course arrives with no fanfare, just a hush that seems to ripple outward before the servers even reach your end of the table. Before you is placed a shallow bamboo tray, its base lined with dried tea leaves. On it sits a single object, a folded paper crane, crisp and perfect, inked faintly with brushstrokes that echo plum blossoms in winter. You stare at it. The host says this course is intention. He doesn't explain further. Some guests begin unfolding their cranes. Inside tiny messages. One woman gasps softly, then laughs. Another smiles and simply places hers into her sleeve without reading it. You unfold yours. Inside 6 words: leave full, return empty, repeat kindly. You don't know if it's a blessing, a riddle, or a recipe. You bow slightly toward the tray anyway. The servers collect the paper birds one by one, as gently as if they might flutter away. Yours is last. You watch it disappear into a lacquered box lined with silk. That's when the instruments return. Not music yet, just tuning. A harp string drawn taut. A flute exhaling scales. A single drum sound soft and round as a held breath. It's enough to pull the room slightly closer to itself. The host offers a new tea-roasted barley. It arrives in unglazed clay cups. You lift yours and inhale. It smells of toasted earth campfire at a safe distance and the end of long stories. You drink. It is warm, plain familiar. The poet recites a haiku from memory. Wind in a teacup, the leaf does not resist, it only learns to float. Several guests bow slightly not to him, but to the tea. Historians still argue whether Tang banquets ever included paper cranes, or whether this tradition was borrowed centuries later from theater intermissions. A few scrolls refer to messages folded in plum shapes, though none survive. Some say they were fortunes, others farewells. The host finally speaks again, voice gentle to be, full is to risk forgetting. No one asks him to explain. Instead, a server sets down a final offering a lacquered box. Inside, tiny slips of mulberry bark paper, each pre-scored for tearing. You are invited to write something to forget, then burn it. Ink is provided. A small brazier glows at the center of the room. You write slowly, precisely, a word, a name, a memory. You don't need to say what it is. You walk to the brazier and let it go. It curls, darkens, flares, then gone. You bow, return to your seat. A guest whispers, "I burned the taste of bitterness." Another answers, "I burned an unfinished poem." You sip more barley tea. The brazier smolders like a shared secret. Outside, a night bird calls once, or maybe twice, and still you are here. Still the banquet goes on. The 23rd course arrives in darkness. Not total darkness, just the soft dimming of lanterns as silk sleeves flutter past, and every flame is lowered to its lowest flicker. The glow is now the color of hush, and the shadows stretch long across the table like yawns made visible. What arrives is not on a plate, but in a bowl of black stone midnight porridge. That's not its official name. No one says it aloud, but that's what it is. The dish is thick and glossy, made from black rice, toasted sesame fermented bean paste, and a single sliver of preserved kumquat. It smells rich, earthy, a little like ink, a little like home. You lift your spoon wooden with the patina of use and dip into the porridge. It resists, then yields. The first taste is deep. Not sweet, not savory, but something in between. A grounding flavor, like soil after rain, like the last note of a zither echoing off stone. It makes your shoulders settle, your breath slow. This is the course of gravity. Across the table, a few guests pause between bites to sigh audibly. One man mutters, "This is the taste of knowing your own name." Another replies, "Or remembering someone else's." No one disagrees. The host gestures toward a low dais where a servant begins to unroll a scroll. Slowly, deliberately, it reaches from tabletop to floor, covered edge to edge in names. No titles, just names. Ancestors, teachers, friends, forgotten chefs, scribes who never finished their novels, poets who never saw their work carved into stone, a monk who made tea so well that one emperor wept. Names no longer spoken in daily life, except tonight. The host reads a few aloud, then offers the brush to a guest, and then to another. The brush passes like an heirloom, and the ink grows thicker. You are offered it. You hesitate. Then you write a name. You don't speak it, but your hand does. The brush leaves a trail of midnight, a soft shape that now lives with the others. Historians still argue whether remembrance rituals were standard or special, whether these name scrolls were a banquet custom or a private host's grief. Some think they were political, a soft rebellion against forgetting. Others believe it was simple, just a way to make sure dinner had a soul. The porridge is nearly gone. You sip water and feel the last grains settle in your stomach like punctuation. Like grounding, like a promise not to float away with the incense. The flute returns, not for a song, but for a single breathy phrase, 3 notes played slow. It feels like a curtain closing, or opening. You can't tell anymore. The guest beside you leans over, murmurs, "I hope this course never ends." You smile, it just did. And yet, still you sit, still you listen. Because sometimes the silence after a name is the most nourishing part. Course 24 arrives like an afterthought or a secret. No tray, no bowl, just a slip of parchment placed beside your cup, folded once and sealed with a drop of wax the color of old plum skin. You wait. Everyone waits. The host nods. You break the seal. Inside a proverb, to eat fully is to become part poem. That's it. You glance at the others. Some guests have different phrases, scraps of ancient recipes, fragments of poems, lines that feel lifted from old lullabies. One woman wipes her eye, another starts giggling. The host lifts his teacup and says, "This course is digestion." Again, no further explanation. And then quiet movement. Attendants bring round steaming towels scented with lemon balm. You wipe your hands, your face, the back of your neck. It's oddly emotional, like erasing only what you're ready to forget. Next comes a pitcher of honeyed water, just warm enough to soothe the chest, but not bold enough to be called tea. You sip. It tastes like an apology someone finally made. Now the room shifts slightly, not in sound but in posture. The straight-back stillness gives way to slight leans, folded legs, a shoulder resting against a screen. A kind of shared exhale passes from guest to guest. The lacquered table no longer gleams with ambition. It reflects memory, Then the host's daughter stands again. This time she doesn't sing, doesn't dance. She tells a story. About a fish. A small, ordinary river fish that once jumped into a scholar's lap during a picnic. The scholar, startled, wrote a 7-line poem to honor its courage, then placed it back in the water. Years later, the story claims the fish returned during another picnic and rested beside his cup for a full hour. The moral, possibly that sincerity creates gravity. Possibly that fish enjoy poetry. No one really knows. But everyone listens as if they do. The poet smiles. I've dated people with less loyalty than that fish. Laughter, gentle, wry. Historians still argue whether banquet stories were staged or spontaneous. Whether hosts encourage guests to bring anecdotal offerings the way modern parties request wine. But this story feels lived in, not rehearsed. The kind told more for the telling than the applause. Your honeyed water is gone. A final bowl arrives, not for consumption, but contemplation. Inside, floating tea leaves unsteeped swirling in still water. You're invited to read your fortune, your reflection, or nothing at all. Your choice. You stare. You see a crescent of a leaf, a bubble that won't pop, the reflection of the guest beside you smiling at nothing, and yourself, a little older than when you sat down. Not visibly, just internally, like you've been slow-cooked into someone wiser. You place the bowl down. The room begins to shift again. Plates are stacked, crumbs collected, incense trimmed, but no one moves to leave. Because course 24 isn't really over. Not until the story settles in your belly, the way good food does. You close your eyes, not from tiredness, but fullness. Course 25 is laughter. It arrives quietly, no trumpet, no server, just a ripple that begins near the poet and spreads like warm broth in a shallow bowl. Someone has told a joke. You didn't hear the setup, only the result. A noblewoman's sharp intake of breath. The host's quiet wheeze. The girl with the peony fan giggling behind her sleeve like it's a duel she's trying not to lose. You lean over and ask your neighbor, "What was the joke?" He shrugs. Something about pickled radish and betrayal. You nod, that tracks. Laughter here is not rowdy. It's not spectacle. It's a postscript, a soft punctuation mark at the end of long silence. A reward for making it this far. The host calls it the releasing course. You realize now, it's always the same. After 24 dishes, each precise, poetic, philosophically spiced, the 25th is simple absurdity. A joke, a misremembered lyric, a childhood story about a chicken who tried to vote. It's catharsis, sugar for the soul. The host shares one of his own, a memory of mislabeling imperial pickles as civilian cucumbers and accidentally sending them to a regional governor. He complimented me, he says, on my rustic generosity. The table bends in mirth. Someone wipes their eyes. The poet taps his chopsticks like a drum and begins a short song, not refined, not rehearsed. Something about dumplings with names about duck sauce, tragedies about plum wine that made someone kiss a tax inspector. No one claps, but everyone hums the final line. You sip your barley tea and smile so hard it feels like stretching after sleep. Historians still argue whether Tang court banquets ended with scripted jokes, or if that was just a clever way for hosts to avoid philosophical indigestion. Some suggest these moments were survival tactics. If you laugh, you'll remember the meal for joy, not just for spice. You believe that. The host calls out the table is full, but the heart must open. And then, a servant enters bearing something you didn't expect. A robe, folded indigo dyed, embroidered with a pattern of clouds and rippling fans. It is not given, but offered to any guest who feels they've earned it. No one moves. Then the girl with the peony fan stands, bows, and says, "I'll wear it for the walk home." Everyone exhales. The host replies, "Then let the street become a second course." The robe is draped over her shoulders. She spins once just to feel the fabric catch the air. A few guests rise. Slowly, no rush. The kind of movement that suggests you could stay forever, but it might be nice to carry this night into moonlight. You remain seated, just for now. A bird calls beyond the window. The candles flicker. A flute plays 2 notes. They land like commas. The guest beside you leans over and says, "It's hard to leave a story while it's still breathing." You agree, but you sip anyway, and begin quietly to prepare your heart for the next flavor. You finally rise, not because the banquet is over, but because you realize it's been inside you for some time now, gently settling like tea leaves in the bottom of a porcelain cup. Your legs are a little stiff, your thoughts even more so. Outside, the courtyard is lit with paper lanterns bobbing faintly in the evening breeze, like dreams tethered by silk. The night smells of sandalwood and steamed rice long since eaten. You step beneath an archway hung with ribbons. Someone tugs gently at your sleeve. It's the host. He presses a tiny parcel into your palm. No words, just a nod. Inside, when you peek dried mandarin, peel a sliver of candied ginger and a single bronze coin, a parting gift for health memory and maybe cab fare, Tang Dynasty style. This is the 26th course remembrance. You're guided toward a small stone path that circles the rear of the estate, a post-meal stroll, though no one dares to call it exercise. It's too poetic for that. Here, digestion is sacred, the movement of food echoed in the movement of bodies. You fall into pace beside a stranger, someone who had been seated too far from you during the banquet to exchange words. You walk together in silence, and it feels like you've already told each other secrets. In the courtyard center is a shallow pool reflecting the moon. Someone's tossed petals across it. They drift in lazy orbits. The water is still warm from the day's sun, and a single frog sings like it's auditioning for the imperial orchestra. A nearby servant sets out cushions and pours hot water over stones, sending scented steam into the night air, basil rice blossom, a trace of burnt sugar. You sit. This course, you understand, is breath. The host appears again not to speak, but to stretch his arms, then fold his legs and join you on the stone. One by one, the remaining guests do the same. A circle not of ceremony, but of closure. Historians still argue whether Tang banquets ended in such quiet rituals. Some scrolls suggest post-meal baths, others mention poetry duels or competitive tea-making. But here now, it's just sitting, and breath, and time unfolding without demand. The poet finally whispers, "I'm always afraid the night will forget me." The girl with the robe replies, "That's why we wear its patterns." A bowl of salted plum tea makes its way around the circle, one sip per guest, no refills. A warm tang at the back of your throat, sweet sour grounding. When it's your turn, you sip and close your eyes. The wind shifts, a robe rustles. Somewhere a gate creaks like a story deciding whether to end. The host opens his eyes and murmurs, "Let the stomach sleep, and the soul stay curious." You bow slightly. You don't even notice when the 26th course ends. You're already waiting for the next one. You're not sure if this is a new course or the echo of the last, but the host rises slowly, stretches his sleeves as though preparing for flight, and says, "Let us now walk the Hall of Echoes." You follow without question. The Hall of Echoes is not on any map. It's not even a hall, not really just a narrow gallery, dimly lit its floor, tiled with worn poetry, and its walls hung with scrolls that hold neither ink nor paint. Instead, they shimmer faintly woven silk, stitched with thread too fine to name. The only way to read them, the host explains, is with your footsteps. You walk. With each step, a faint hum, a rustle, the illusion of a whisper that may or may not be words. The poet says, "They say it remembers every banquet ever held here." You ask, "What does it do with all that memory?" The host smiles, digests it. At the far end, a screen is drawn back to reveal something you weren't expecting. A kitchen. Not grand, not ceremonial, just the place where everything began. Copper pots hang from hooks. A fire pit smolders with leftover embers. A single cook, an elderly woman in a robe streaked with broth stains and pride, stands beside a tray of steamed buns. She looks at the host. He nods. She bows only slightly, but with the weight of generations. This, you understand, is the 27th course gratitude. The buns are small, imperfect, handmade, filled with red bean and citrus peel, served hot in silence. You take one. It steams in your hand like breath. You eat it in 3 bites. It tastes better than anything served before, because it is made without performance, because it is the first thing tonight that is simply food. The cook watches you. You bow. She nods satisfied. You are guided from the kitchen to a small garden patch, barely more than a square of dirt, a few stalks of scallion, some late-season mustard greens. This, the host says, is where it all starts. Not the menu, but the intention. He bends down, presses a palm to the soil, and says, "No dish lives without this." A guest kneels beside him, then another. You follow. Your knees touch dirt. Your fingers brush leaves. You smell the honest, sharp tang of root and earth. You have never been hungrier. You have never been more full. Historians still argue whether Tang officials ever touched their own ingredients. Some say it was frowned upon, too rustic, too base. Others claim it was tradition the best banquets ended with humility. This moment feels like truth. Not recorded, not remembered, just lived. You dust your hands off on your robe, rise slowly, and realize something odd. You're not tired. The food has become breath, the silence seasoning, the laughter spice. You've been digested in reverse, emptied a rush, fed with stillness. The host walks you back to the banquet hall. It's nearly empty now, except for one thing. Your original seat, cleaned, waiting. And on your plate, a single seed. You don't ask what to do with it. You return to your seat, the same place where all this began, though it now feels more like a threshold than a destination. The single seed before you is pale oval, unmarked. Nothing grand, nothing showy. The kind of thing you'd overlook if it weren't placed so deliberately. The poet leans in and says, some say it's apricot, others say peach, but really it's a reminder. You nod. Of course it is. The host approaches one last time, carrying no tray, no scroll, no story, only a wooden box with a lid carved in clouds. He sets it on the table and opens it slowly. Inside, slips of cloth, indigo, folded. Each guest receives one. Yours is warm from the box's breath. You unfold it gently to find a single phrase stitched in gold thread. Go hungry for nothing, go full of something else. You don't know if it's a proverb, a fortune, or the world's kindest farewell. The host raises both arms, not high, not showy, just enough to gather the room's attention. He says you've eaten 27 courses, but you've only just begun the final one. He waits. The 28th course, he says, is the wind. And there it is. A soft gust through the open screen. Not cold, but crisp. It threads through your sleeves, lifts the ends of your robe, finds the back of your neck. You shiver, not from chill, but from clarity. Somewhere in the distance a bell sounds. Not to summon, not to dismiss, just to mark that something has passed. The girl with the peony fan closes her eyes. The host steps back, and slowly guests begin to rise. Some stretch, some bow, some linger, but all eventually turn toward the courtyard path, where the night waits like an unbaked scroll. You stand last. You glance once more at the table now bare, save for your seed and that folded cloth. You gather both. Outside, the lanterns sway. The poet is already gone. The flute player has vanished. Only footprints remain shallow and clean in the swept dust of the stone path. You follow them, each step lighter than the last. You pass the garden, the kitchen, the hall of echoes. You do not look back, because the meal is not behind you now. It is inside you. And so you walk into the quiet, into the wind, into sleep, wind down, and now you're far from the banquet. Your feet are tucked under soft covers. The tea is cooled, the dishes have been cleared, and the hall is only a memory, a whispering thread of flavors and laughter and breath and silence. Let it settle. Let it spiral gently through your thoughts, like steam rising from a porcelain bowl. There was ginger, yes. There was ink. There was someone who told a story that felt like it belonged to you. You may not remember every dish, but that's the point. You carry only what fed you deeply. And you've been fed. Slow, strange, beautiful. A poem, a dumpling, a shadow of sesame. So sleep now. The night is full of small winds and faded spices. The banquet is over. But the dream goes on.